one. So if board members would come back to the table. Mrs. Strauss, I believe you wanted me to run this meeting?
Yes, Ms. Evans. You will be the manager for this.
Well, thank you very much, and we are very, very pleased to have Dr. Danny Lewin of Children's National Medical Center and George Washington University School of Medicine, as well as Dr. Judith Owens, professor at Harvard Medical School and affiliated with Boston Children's Hospital. Do I have that right, Judy? And Dr. Deborah Temkin of Child's Trend, Inc. So, Dr. Owens, we certainly want to thank you for coming all the way from Boston just to talk with us today. Board members should know Dr. Owens came down today just to be with us. Are you flying back tonight, Judy? Tomorrow morning, and we very much appreciate the extra effort that it took. The slides have been posted. It was a little, I believe just this morning, the final version of the slides, so board members may not have had an opportunity to see all of it, but what we're going to do is Dr. Owens is going to give us a presentation, and Dr. Lewin and Dr. Temkin will be following up with their own presentation. And then, of course, we would very much like to have plenty of time for questions of board members, because I know there will be quite a few. So with that, who's going to lead off? Dr. Lewin? Thank you so much, Danny, for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity to come back and speak to you. It's been a few years, and just to assure you, we've been incredibly busy working on applying many of the lessons learned that here in Fairfax to school districts across the country and to the national movement of school start time change, as well as crunching data and publishing papers, which is what we're going to be presenting today. So it's a pleasure to present with Dr. Owens and Dr. Temkin. We're going to talk a little bit about school start, a little bit of the history, since not everyone was here for the whole history of school start time change, outcomes of the study, as I said, and then perceptions, which is also some of the research that we've done. So can I stand up? Do I have to speak? Okay.
If you would just be sure that the microphone captures what you're saying, because we are recording it, and we definitely want to capture it.
I have a loud voice. So I'm going to give some of the background on school start time change. So Fairfax County, this shows the history of Fairfax County school start times dating back to about 1950. And you can see that there was a general evolution to earlier and earlier school start times over time that was due to a whole host of different factors. I won't go into those details. Some feasibility, some financial. In 1989, Fairfax County Public Schools put together a task force on school start time change and analyzed the issue very, very thoroughly. That ultimately did not lead to a change in school start time change in school start times. And then in 2004, Sleep in Fairfax was founded, which is an advocacy group which worked extensively on this issue. 2006, there was a feasibility study follow-up to the initial study. And then we came on board in about 2014, Dr. Owens, Daryl Drobnich, and I, for the Blueprint for Change, which was a project to facilitate education, community engagement, transportation, and planning in the district. The school board ended up voting on school start time change to be implemented in 2016-2017. And then, so high school and secondary schools went from 7:20 to between 8 and 8:10 a.m., and middle schools shifted earlier from 7:50 to 8:15 back to 7:35 a.m. I should also say that it was at that point that we got in touch with Child Trends and were subsequently awarded with a couple of other collaborators a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to study the impact of school start time change. And some of the data that we're showing today comes from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So for just a little bit of background on the issue and to give you some context about the science and health of kids. Kids in the teen age group, and these are rough estimates, and I want you to know that these are very broad ranges, and I'll give you some more specific ranges later, that optimal sleep time for teenagers ranges from about 8.5 to 10 hours. So obviously younger children need more sleep. As kids age, teenagers still need more than the 8 hours that adults optimally need. So this shows a cycling of sleep stages across the course of the night. So this is time on this axis here, midnight and 8 a.m. So what happens when we go to sleep is we cycle into a very deep stage of sleep, which is an appetitive move. We're very hungry for this very deep stage of sleep. We then cycle up to lighter stages of sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep is in red. So the general trend is for this appetitive function to be satisfied early in the night for very deep sleep. Toward the end of the night, we have more rapid eye movement sleep, which is controlled by a whole other sleep system, which I'll talk about. So what's important to note here, and that's relevant to school start time change, is that this is where high school start times sit. It's actually recommended that they sit out at about 8:30, which is work that Dr. Owens did to get the American Academy of Pediatrics to recognize healthy school start times. But with this start time, you can see that we're cutting into the middle of a rapid eye movement sleep period and actually truncating this very important stage of sleep. This is a typical sleep pattern for kids where they're sleeping. Remember how much I said they need. Kids on average, and this comes from some data that we collected in DC, sleeping about 7.5 hours a night, most nights during the week, catch up a little bit on Thursday. They're out at the game on Friday night, have grossly reduced sleep, and then their sleep time increases significantly. And often they go to bed later and wake up later on the weekends. We call this social jet lag, which is a natural shift on weekends. And for any of you who've traveled west to east, we know that the internal body clock system just does not adjust. So for kids to shift 2 hours, essentially living in Boulder or living in Los Angeles on the weekends and then having to shift back on Monday morning does not work biologically for kids. So this is one phenomena that's of significant concern. You may know that the most recent 2017 Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology was awarded to individuals who did circadian sleep research. And this is absolutely essential. I've talked a little bit about sleep duration. What circadian refers to is a 24-hour cycling of our sleep phases. This is a somewhat complicated slide, but what it shows is the relationship between that sleep process, the sleep drive on top, and on the bottom, the clock. Okay, this is the circadian system that is very reliably cycling throughout the course of the day and night. And what happens with adolescents is this whole curve is shifted to your right. So they have a biological propensity to go to bed later and wake up later. And the Nobel Prize highlights the importance of the circadian system for overall health. And that's why it's essential that adults and kids sleep at a time that's biologically optimal for them. This is just a picture of the circadian system. We have in every single cell in the body clock genes. And those clock genes regulate essential cell functioning. So again, if we're not sleeping at the optimal time, we're having an impact not only on the brain and on brain function, but on many organ systems: heart, liver, stomach, respiration, etc. Okay, so just in summary, some of the key points about sleep in adolescence. Puberty is associated with a biological shift in clock time. Again, deep biology. 10 to 13-year-olds need about 9.5 to 10 hours of sleep at night. Their optimal bedtimes are between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m. 14 to 16-year-olds, 9 to 10 hours of sleep. Their optimal, meaning their biological bedtimes, are between 9 and 10:30 at night. And then 17 to 18-year-olds, 8.5 to 9.5 hours, and their biological bedtimes are between 10 and 11. Okay, so these are biologically regulated and mediated issues. And when we have a lot of shifts in the timing of these, kids get into trouble also when they don't actually get the sleep that they need. So here is a recent publication that was actually based on the Fairfax County youth risk survey, taking data on 8th graders only from 2010, 2011, and 2012. The sample size was about 26,000 kids. And these are self-report, and we were just looking at a few variables that your kids reported on. So, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to compare the middle school kids who had a 7:45 to 8:15 start time to the secondary school kids who had an earlier start time. So here we had a beautiful, natural, scientific experiment in your community to look at these data. And we wanted to look at the impact on sleep health and academics. So the results of the study, and I'm going to whiz through this very quickly because there's a lot more data to present. I'll just focus you down here. What we found is, so this is less than 7 hours, and this is 7 hours. So what you can see is that there's about 44% of kids who are sleeping for 7 hours or less a night. So that's a very significant portion. What this shows is sleep time, and blue is school start times, the earliest school start times in blue, middle school start times in red, and in green, the later school start times. And this just shows that the sleep of kids with later school start times was increased. They had more sleep. Here I'm only talking about duration. And you certainly see a peak around 8 hours, but the take-home message here overall is that later school start times does facilitate increased sleep. So the final piece of this, and my final slide, was to look at the contribution, the statistical contribution of the earliest school start times and early school start times to sleep duration, and a couple of academic outcomes, and these are self-reported. So the kids were asked what kind of grades they're getting. And then they were also asked how often do they complete their homework. So in this first panel, you can see that sleep duration, I put a star here where there are significant associations. The early school start times were associated with, earlier start time were associated with shorter sleep duration. But then we also found that the earliest school start times were associated with lower grades. Okay, so what's essential here is that it's not only sleep duration, but it's when schools start that impacts outcomes and grades and in other variables as well. We did find that early start times impacted sleep duration, which impacted homework completion, but we did not find a direct relationship here in this case with homework completion. But this is a relatively novel finding that not a lot of studies have been able to parse out not only the impact of sleep duration, but when schools start, which means translates to when kids are sleeping. So in summary, longer sleep duration is associated with later start times. Both sleep duration and school start times contribute to academic performance. So I'd like to thank you. I think maybe we'll hold questions to the end, if that's okay.
That would be fine. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Owens.
They have to switch the slide.
So, I'm going to present and myself. And these are, some of this is going to be baseline data and some of this is outcome data looking at pre-post the school start time change. So the different things that I'm going to describe to you briefly are first our baseline data on the association between sleep and self-regulation. And then also baseline data on sleep and drowsy driving in Fairfax County. The impact of the change in school start time on sleep parameters, pre and post, and also on health and safety outcomes. And finally, a separate but I think related and important study that we did looking at school start times and adolescent car crashes using both the Fairfax County Youth Risk Survey data as well as Department of Motor Vehicles data in Virginia. So this first study was published in Pediatrics just about a year ago. And this was looking at self-regulation and sleep duration, but also sleepiness, daytime sleepiness as reported by students, and what's called chronotype. Now, Dr. Lewin alluded to this issue of the fact that adolescents after puberty are essentially night owls. So they have what's called an eveningness chronotype, which means they prefer to go to bed later and get up later. And so we wanted to look at what the relationship was between short sleep duration, having a more eveningness chronotype, reporting daytime sleepiness, and the main outcome here was self-regulation. And I'll explain what that means in just a minute. And we had about 2,000 students in this sample from 7th to 12th grade. So self-regulation is defined as the process by which inner states or responses are altered or modulated. And so it involves modulating intensity, frequency, duration of your behavior in social settings. It involves the ability to initiate or stop your behavior according to situational demands, and importantly, to postpone acting on an impulse. And so it impacts some incredibly important outcomes, including problem solving, decision making, planning, modulation of emotions, and risk taking. And what's really important about this in particular is that this concept of self-regulation, or what we also call executive functions, are at its most rapid development during adolescence. So if you're impacting self-regulation at this age, it has a very important effect, negative effect. So what we found in terms of sleep duration, and this was defined as the difference in hours between their usual school night bedtime and their school day wake-up time. So the mean was about 7.5 hours. And 22% of the sample were getting less than 7 hours, about 30% 7 to less than 8 hours, and the rest of the sample were getting in the desired range that Dr. Lewin. So this is a busy slide, and what I want you to focus on are a couple of different things. So basically what we found is that sleep duration had essentially no association with self-regulation, either cognitive, emotional, or behavioral self-regulation. But what did was how sleepy the students perceived themselves to be, and whether or not they were more of an evening. And so what this graph shows is that even if you look at students who, if you divide the sample by sleep duration into students who get less than 7 hours or more than or equal to 7 hours, what you see is, in terms of particularly cognitive and emotional self-regulation, is that those students at a higher score, this is the score on a self-regulation scale. So counterintuitively, a higher score indicated more impaired self-regulation. So even within these two subgroups of sleep duration, what had the most impact was sleepiness had more impact on cognitive and emotional and behavioral self-regulation. And by the same token, we saw the same pattern, that even getting more than or equal to 7 hours of sleep. If you were an evening type, you had more impairments of self-regulation. So the bottom line to this is that among adolescents, at least in this sample, evening chronotype and increased daytime sleepiness had a greater impact on self-regulation than short sleep duration, especially for cognitive and emotional self-regulation. And so the take-home message here is that efforts to improve self-regulation in adolescents by altering sleep habits may be about more than just increasing the amount of sleep that they get. So the story becomes more complicated than we thought it would be. You know, I think we all would love to just draw an arrow between how much sleep you get and all kinds of other outcomes, but it's not that simple. So this is the first paper that was published on the outcomes of the school start time change. And this was published in the journal Sleep Health just about 2 months ago. So, as you know, this was a quasi-experimental design, 2 cross-sectional surveys. The first survey was done in March through June 2015 and comprised of about slightly over 2,000 students. The follow-up survey after the intervention in March through June of 2016 was the same 19 schools using the same survey, and this was about almost 1,200 students post-sample. So what this shows, we looked at both the 50-minute delay in school start times among high school students, but we also looked at the 30-minute advance, so the earlier school start time in the middle school sample. And essentially, I just wanted to point out in terms of looking at the pre and post samples. Now remember, some of these were the same kids who answered the survey before and after, but most of them were not. So this was not a study in which we took a group of kids and had them fill out a survey in the same group before and after. We did end up looking at those students who answered both surveys versus those who answered only one, and there was no difference in the two samples. So I think that was reassuring. But for the most part, the pre and post samples were similar, except that we had a higher percentage of non-Hispanic whites in the pre-sample, and we also had a lower percentage of reduced free or reduced price meal. What that translates into is that makes it really difficult to look at a subgroup of students who may be more disadvantaged because of the relatively low numbers. So these are the sleep parameters that we looked at. We looked at school night sleep duration, school night bedtime, school night wake time, weekend sleep duration, what time they went to bed and woke up on the weekend, and weekend oversleep, which is the difference between the amount of sleep they got on school nights and the amount of sleep they got on weekends. And the bigger that difference, the more negative an outcome that is, because what that means is they have a more need to catch up on weekends to offset the decreased sleep amounts that they're getting. So, bottom line, this is the high school students. They slept 30 minutes more on average. Their school night bedtime shifted slightly by about 7 minutes. So this is very much in keeping with other studies which have not shown that when school start times change, that bedtimes get later. And that's really important because going around the country and talking to all these school districts, probably the most common question I get is, well, it's not going to make any difference because they're just going to go to bed later. Okay. So that has shown not to be true now in study after study after study. Their school night wake time was later by 38 minutes. So they slept in, although not quite as much as the 50-minute delay. We also saw a decline in weekend oversleep. Again, this is a marker for chronic sleep loss during the week. So and we saw improvements in daytime sleepiness, and you can't see at the bottom, but decline in napping as well. So every sleep parameter improved, not all significantly, but I think the key ones. And by the same token, very similar findings with the middle school 30-minute advance. They slept 15 minutes less. Their wake time was earlier by about 26 minutes. They had to get up earlier. But their bedtimes moved a little bit earlier as well. So that ended up in translating into a 15-minute. And we saw a similar kind of thing, an increase in weekend oversleep in the middle school students, an increase in self-reported daytime sleepiness, an increase, although it wasn't statistically significant, in napping, and lower satisfaction with their sleep. So the bottom, and this, I think this is really cool. So let me see if I can, this is a little bit complicated. So what we wanted to know was, for those students who use electronics, light-emitting devices before bed, like television, computers, smartphones, what happens with them? So at baseline, as you might expect, the adolescents who reported using those light-emitting devices had a shorter school night sleep. That was clearly associated. However, changing school start times didn't change the percentage of students who were light-emitting devices. And the impact of school start time change on sleep duration was similar between those who did and did not use those devices before bed. So in other words, the findings are consistent with using these electronic devices before bed is not good, okay? It impacts your ability to fall asleep and ultimately your sleep duration. However, this practice did not seem to alter the potential benefits of school start time change. I think to me, that's one of the most interesting findings. Because again, what I get feedback on is, well, if they just turn the electronic devices off, we wouldn't have to change school start. But that really, at least again in this sample, did not seem to be true. So the conclusions are the changes in sleep were strikingly consistent in terms of improvements with start time delay in the high school students and declines in the middle school students. So a 15-minute delay resulted in 30-minute average increase in sleep with a 30-minute, 15-minute less sleep. And we know that even a 30-minute change in sleep duration can be associated with positive outcomes. We did 2 studies in independent schools which quite clearly showed that. What I thought was interesting is that the middle school bedtimes moved earlier. So maybe, parents have a little bit more influence on the middle school students than on the high school students, but it also, or what?
They're retired.
Yes. But also implies that when you make these kinds of policy changes, you need to also provide sleep health education, because it doesn't necessarily change behavior. And we also saw a decline in high school students, the weekend oversleep, the difference between their school night and weekend bedtime, and daytime sleepiness and napping. And what Dr. Lewin mentioned is so important, because the time to which school start time is delayed may be equally important as the amount of time that the start time changes, which is where we kind of originally came to about the 8:30 or later. We're inching towards thinking that maybe that really is a key thing. So this is preliminary data analysis. We have not yet submitted this for publication. So our team also looked at the impact of start time changes on health and safety outcomes. What I wanted to talk about first in relation to safety outcomes in particular is what the baseline data showed. So this was the high school sample. These were the older high school students, ones who were actually driving. And we just wanted to know, what was the percentage who reported drowsy driving? Well, it was almost 50%. And as you might imagine, sleep duration did have an impact on that. And I think one of the reasons why sleep duration may be so important in driving is sleep duration impacts vigilance. It impacts reaction time. And so what we saw is if you got students who got less than 7 hours of sleep had a 14% in the likelihood that they reported drowsiness. And similarly, if they were an evening chronotype, they were 15-fold more likely to. Again, we have this story that maybe it's a little bit more complicated and that chronotype really has an impact, but the relative increase in the prevalence of drowsy driving in students who slept less than 7 hours was almost 36%. And a similar increase in students who are evening chronotype. So, what did we see in terms of health and safety outcomes? So we looked at self-regulation pre and post, just like we did at baseline. We looked at low mood, fair or poor self-reported health, breakfast on most school days, being physically active, how many days a week, the percent of overweight and obesity, the percent who reported having a sports or exercise-related injury in the past 6 months, other injuries in the past 6 months, and drowsy driving. Now, we adjusted for a bunch of different confounding variables like gender and socioeconomic status and racial status and a bunch of other things. So essentially what we saw was, and this is outlined in red, we saw changes in the positive direction on every single one of these outcomes. So for example, the percentage of kids who reported having a sports or exercise-related injury in the past 6 months went from 46.5-ish to 44%. The percent who reported drowsy driving went from 47.6% to 40%. So across the board. Now, the one that was highly statistically significant was the mood change. Improvement in mood after the change in school. Now, we saw a fairly similar, although not quite as dramatic a picture, I think, with the middle school students, the 30-minute advance in school start times, but all in the direction you would expect. So they had a higher percentage reporting low mood. They had a higher percentage reporting poor fair or poor health. They had a lower percentage reporting physical, or number of days of physical activity, and very slightly increase in other injuries. None of those were statistically significant, but there is definitely a trend. All of these. So all high school health and safety outcomes showed trends in improvement, increased self-regulation scores, eating breakfast, being physically active, particularly decreased low mood, health, obesity, overweight, injuries in sports and other, and some health and safety outcomes in the middle school sample also showed the trends in the opposite direction. So the same thing with sleep that we saw, everything was in the direction that you would have. Okay, so this last thing, this was a project that was done by myself and a sleep fellow from Toronto, Sick Kids. And this was presented at the World Sleep Congress in Prague back in October. And so we wanted to look at the impact of the 50-minute delay in high school start times and the relationship with driving safety. The sleep and driving, the sleep data was obtained from the Fairfax Youth Risk Survey, and the accident data was Department of Motor Vehicles. So the Fairfax Youth Risk Survey, this was just grade 12. This was over 10,000 students pre and post the start. And when we looked at the youth risk data, what we saw was a decrease in the percentage of students who were getting the lower amount of sleep, and an increase in the percentage of students who were getting more sleep. It's not the same sample, obviously, but it corroborates what we saw on our side. Again, this is a little bit busy, but what we found was from 2014-15 to 15-16, the Fairfax County adolescent crash rate was reduced by a little over 5%. But it was increased. 5%. Yeah, 5%. It's not on this graph. Yeah. This is it's a fairly complicated, but I'm sorry. So the adolescent crash rate in Fairfax County. Now, we can't necessarily attribute this to the school start time change, okay? Right, exactly. It was reduced by a little over 5%, but in the rest of Virginia, excluding Fairfax County, it was increased by 3.5%. Now, they don't measure drowsy driving related crashes, but But what I thought was particularly interesting, it was not only the crash rate that was significantly different in Fairfax, but distraction-related and alcohol-related crashes. Now, if you go back to thinking about this issue of self-regulation and risk-taking, and also vigilance and reaction time, starts to kind of make sense that it may not, and I think this is really important, it may not just impact drowsy driving per se, but it may increase the risk of other risky behaviors while driving. sleep-ish, I mean. And when you change school start times, that important because we don't measure drowsy driving accidents. Law enforcement officials aren't trained to ask about that at the scene of the accident. And unfortunately, drowsy driving crashes are more likely to be fatal because the effort to avoid the crash because they're asleep. So I thought that was really interesting, and essentially this translates into a distraction-related crash rate reduction of 8.7%, an alcohol-related crash reduction of 20%. And again, I mean, this could have been due to a safe driving course that was mandatory among high school seniors. You can't attribute this to start time change. But, so reduced by 20%, and there was no change in the rest of Virginia. So these are my collaborators, and I certainly want to thank the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I want to thank all of you for such an inspiration to us, and I was so excited to be able to come back and share this. I applaud your vision and courage in making this change. Believe me, the eyes of the world are on Fairfax County. I will tell you, wherever I go, people ask, well, what happened with Fairfax County? So you guys are a real role model. Including Boston, which just voted last week.
To change their start. Yay. All right. Well, Dr. Owens, we want to thank you and Dr. Lewin as well for your stellar work with this board to help us with the start time change. And I know there are going to be a lot of questions. Dr. Temkin, did you?
Yep. I will go through this quickly, I promise. But you've just had a lot of numbers thrown at you, a lot of numbers. I'm thrilled to actually bring some voices from your community to talk about how they've actually perceived this change. We wanted to understand, have these changes actually been perceived by the community? How have they reacted to it? Fairfax did an incredible job of hearing the voices before from stakeholders before the change was made. These are the reactions from after. This is just quickly our sample. I'll note we did have a small sample, but we did reach what we call saturation. We were hearing pretty much the same things from most of our participants. The basic message, the one thing to take home from this, is that it's the new normal. People have adjusted. You hear this in a parent quote, I'm into a routine now, it's the new normal. You hear it from a principal. As a school, I think we've done a pretty good job of adjusting. But where it actually comes to, did this work? People aren't so sure. We heard from several students that, yeah, they felt more rested, they felt more sleep. Our parents and our school staff weren't so sure. They said, I don't really see that my students are more rested. And parents, we had one parent who commented that they did see the change in their student. We had other parents who said, I think they're just staying up later. Which is interesting given our survey findings. We also saw that most adapted to school activities. Now, great credit is given to the schools. We heard from a lot of the students and parents, as well as the school staff, that a lot of adjustments were made, particularly with the gap between the end of the school day and the beginning of athletics. This actually caused some mixed reactions among the participants in our study. They noted that this was great because it kept them going home at an earlier time. But we did have comments about the accessibility of healthy food between the end of school and athletic practice. We heard that with the reduction of that gap, students did not have time to go grab healthy food and were left to grab fast food, especially without accessibility of food at school. We also heard that the reduction in that gap also led to them not receiving the same academic support We heard a lot about teachers not necessarily getting there before school and then having to rush home after school. And so the availability of teachers after school was a concern that was raised. And we did hear some concern about care for younger siblings, although we did hear that work was fairly adjusted for students who were working after school. We did hear quite a lot, especially from our school administrators, about the reliability of school buses. We had one particular passionate school administrator who told us that he was seeing a bus being late pretty much every week. And this, you have no control of commuter traffic. I fully understand that. But he noted that this was particularly of concern in his school because many of his students were getting breakfast at school. And with the school buses getting there late, they didn't have time to grab breakfast. So this particular administrator instituted grab-and-go carts. He was able to get those students food, but he did note that this was a concern. So this was interesting. This was an interesting finding. By background, I am an education researcher. Changes in academic outcomes were neither a driver for school start time change from the perceptions of students and parents, and they were not realized. So this didn't come up when we asked them, why do you think Fairfax changed the school start times? What do you think this is driving to? No one mentioned academics. When we dug further, they said, yeah, I'm not seeing it. I haven't seen a real change. Many cited individual differences. And just as a note, we did do some quantitative exploration of the academic data to find what we saw, and we actually do see an increase in academics. Now, going to your point, Ms. Schultz, of correlation is not causation. We cannot attribute a gain in GPA here solely to school start time. We need to do some additional mediational analysis here to see. But going back to Dr. Lewin's findings that sleep duration can directly impact GPA, this is a great finding. Essentially what this means is that for any individual student in any one course, they move from a B to an A minus. That's a pretty significant move. We, however, did not find any change in attendance. These are from academic records, the attendance data. Tardiness is self-reported. We asked them if they had been late to school. But we did see a reduction in tardiness due to sleepiness. One thing that we heard over and over, however, was that the school start time change led to many positive benefits for family routines. We heard from some of our school staff that they had time to walk their dog before school, and that made that particular school staff member really happy because she had not been able to do that for many years. We also, this particular finding as academic youth development researcher, this struck me to see this, that the adults being at home has significantly improved. Now, if you think about any sort of research you know about delinquency, deviancy, it's that period, unsupervised time after school, that kids are most likely to get involved in delinquent behaviors, teen pregnancy, et cetera. We see a very significant increase in the number of parents reporting that there is at least one adult at home when the student gets home. So most perceived the school start time as positive to neutral, but there is very few negative implications. There are some rooms for improvement. For instance, school bus reliability and access to healthy food options after school that we may want to think about some policy implications for. So it's my job to sort of sum up this whole presentation. One thing to note, as both Dr. Lewin and Dr. Owens mentioned, you're our leader in all of this work, and the nation is looking to you. These findings, which are either have been published or in the process of being published, are really setting the foundation for school start time change across the country. And we have seen some pretty significant outcomes from Fairfax. And their stakeholders are starting to perceive those as well, although there may be some room for improvement. So where do we go from here? One thing I will note as a perpetual researcher and an evaluator, we need more evaluation. There have been some new papers that have come out that some of these gains may mitigate over time, Students may start going back to their normal routines, later bedtimes. We need to follow up. We need to see what's happening now a couple years after the school start time change has been implemented. We also know that although we've seen some significant gains, they're not ideal. As you saw in Dr. Owen's slides, the average sleep duration is still under 8 hours for our high school students. And it goes without saying the middle school start times remain a concern. To see the declines in the middle school start time, middle school outcomes is certainly concerning. We may need to do some better messaging about the outcomes that we found to build more stakeholder buy-in around school start time change. And as you heard Dr. Owens mention, we may need to pair school start time change with education about healthy sleep habits. So just a few policy recommendations for you. 8:30 a.m. is the AAP recommendation. Finding ways to get there, I know, are very difficult, but we will still make that recommendation. Address some of the issues that have arisen as a result of school start time change. Access to healthy food after school, school bus reliability. These seem like they can be easy wins. Promote inclusion of healthy sleep habits education. And of course, I would not be a good researcher without mentioning supporting additional evaluation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Excellent presentations. And I have several hands in the air, so I will start with Mrs. Schultz.
What a great way. I wish we could end all of our work sessions with this much good news. I had a couple of points I wanted to make on your slides. If you can go back to the sleep duration.
School night sleep duration?
I have it. You don't have the pages at the bottom. The one that has
Dr. Owen's presentation?
the one with the curve. I'm sorry, it's
I think that was in mine.
the less than 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, and then it has the
down just a little bit further.
way before that. It was slide 6. Going down.
Okay, then it was probably in series.
Yeah, it was in mine.
Yep, keep going.
Yeah, no,
Back,
keep going
back,
up, up,
back.
up, back, no, other way.
Up.
Yep. There we go.
There we
Yep.
go. So this doesn't say when it happens. I'm assuming that the major component is that when 7 to less than 8 hours happens is important. I mean, that's really the takeaway.
Yes.
That even
Yes.
if it
Yes.
stayed the same,
Yes.
if the same student 7 to 8 hours earlier, it's when the sleep happens, and this is the beauty of the later start time.
Yes.
Is that because they have that adolescent brain, and although I was surprised to see that the night, what did you call it? Night chronotype. The night chronotype, that more adolescents don't, is that self-described?
Yes. Yes.
That more don't describe themselves by default as night chronotypes. But so a night chronotype who now gets sleep when they're supposed to get sleep, when they're in that deeper REM sleep, instead of trying to force themselves to bed earlier and then having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever, that this is a more healthful sleep. Okay, that was number one. I wanted to make sure I had that takeaway.
You can think of it as the equivalent to asking all of us as adults to wake up. Think of it as the equivalent of asking all of us adults to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning every day.
Okay.
And that's the lowest point of circadian alertness in the entire 24-hour day.
Can you advance 2 slides? Go ahead, 2 slides. So, I mean, and I know this is a busy slide,
Yeah.
but in terms of academic impact, the cognitive I get. Can you give us some examples of what the differentiators are between emotional and behavioral?
Yeah, emotional would be like reacting to a negative situation in a very, reacting, overreacting, I guess, would be sort of
That's
one.
not behavioral?
No.
Okay.
Well, it can translate into
Okay.
behavioral, but the behavioral has more to do with the risk-taking
Okay.
behaviors, whereas the emotional is sort of a heightened emotional response.
Okay. And then on the, if you could advance to the drowsy driving. I mean, these are really significant statistics. Go ahead. And I'm wondering if, we have the crash data, if that isn't something that we can continue to refine and look at while there isn't, we can't say there's a correlation and a causation, connectedness. It's really strong. What other thing substantially changed in Fairfax County in a year to explain,
Right.
some of these statistics? Now, at the top of the chart, is that a typical norm of, close to a 50-50 split between, self-reporting drowsy driving and not?
Well, that's an excellent question, and actually there is very little data on that. And the last data that I was aware of, and I just did a search on this, was data collected in the National Sleep Foundation Sleep in America poll in 2006. And that wasn't actually published. So one of the beauties of this data is that we don't really have these numbers. We don't know what these numbers look like. And I hope that this will incentivize other researchers to look at the prevalence of drowsy driving in the adolescent population.
I mean, in terms of societal cost, I honestly think that this is a extremely significant slice of what we've done because of the economic impact to businesses who employ anyone who goes to or from work, either in a company vehicle or not. In the nation's worst traffic in the country, in terms of insurance costs for insuring young people. I mean, there is so much potential here that, I'm hoping that researchers keep looking at this, keep looking at Fairfax County, because having three drivers, two are teenage and one is just past teenage, the impact of a later start time to a family that has potentially safer drivers on the road, less likelihood to, be in accidents. I mean, there are long-term implications across the country in terms of selling this that are, it's more than homework and it's more than grades. Now you're talking about lives. You're talking about, costs. I don't know, cars being totaled. That's an inside. That's an inside joke for those around the table who know. So this to me is really, really significant. I have had people asking, what are the results? Prove it. So I've had some naysayers say, yeah, maybe the kids are slightly better rested, but has it made any difference? And the whopping answer out of this is categorically yes. And, tell me which subject, and I can point to you and say, we're headed in the right direction except middle school. So I thank you. I know other people have questions. Oh, the one thing I was going to ask is, did anybody look at any of our discipline statistics?
So I can speak to that. The district wouldn't give us the discipline data.
Dang it.
Yes.
I mean, those people in the district.
Well, I'm not saying the board. I am saying the research office was too concerned with the sensitivity of those data. As I am particularly interested in discipline, I would love, especially given the finding with the adult at home, to carry that further.
Well, Dr. Brabrand, as somebody who is, I am, relentless on discipline reform and our practices, our restorative justice. If we have an ability to maybe revisit in some fashion giving disciplines, this is extraordinarily important to stop the pipeline to prison statistics and everything else that's associated. If we're able to tie some of this together and get something meaningful, not only for our own practices, but for far beyond, I would beseech a greater sense of cooperation on
Just
that.
for a question, do you know when you made the request? Has it been
Yes, it was well before July.
well before July? Thank you.
Let's do it.
All right, and then
I like these.
There you go. That's not going to work forever, but for now.
Right now, that's not a bad question.
Yeah.
I'll certainly review it. I'll take a look.
And actually, I'm going to segue right now to Dr. Brabrand, just to say a few words. I know he may have to take off for his evening meeting before we close up, but so I'm going to go out of sequence and let Dr. Brabrand speak.
I do want to thank you all for coming. My reference to the timing is I was here for many years, 18 years. I left for 5 years, and I came back in July to be superintendent. So thank you for cooperating with us and collaborating with us, and I'm sure we'll have continued collaboration. And this board did make a sea change in making this decision, and now coming back to review data. That's what good practice looks like in a classroom, in a school, and frankly for a school system too. So, I mean, the honest truth for me is it's a ton of data. I really want to dip into it even more, and maybe we'll follow up privately to ask you a few other questions, which I'm probably not going to get a chance to do tonight. It's time for the board for this work session, but thank you so much.
And I will mention to you, we owe you a final report, which will be a collection of all of these papers that we will be sending to the district, I believe, in February. So look forward to that.
Ms. McLaughlin?
This is extremely exciting. I've been on the board 6 years and was out in the community before that with our tireless colleagues Sandy Evans and Phyllis Payne, who I see here this evening as well. For over a decade, passionate parents fought for something that we knew was an absolute health concern, not just in the 10th largest school system in the country, but nationwide. The fact that this board, along with the amazing Superintendent Karen Garza and the amazing Jeff Plattenberg, who truly partnered with this board. They heard us, they found the solution so that fiscally we could bring this to the community and people wouldn't say, well, it sounds really compelling, but we just can't afford it. Being told it's going to be $40 million a year to put this into place, to Jeff Plattenberg and his team bringing it down to a $5 million implementation start is phenomenal. So those are my first words of praise. I will say, as a parent, 3 boys coming up through the system. My 2 older sons, one's a senior in college, one's a junior in college, one's a senior in high school. Only the senior in high school got to enjoy this because my second son graduated just as we voted it in. The difference I have seen in my son, his friends, my 2 nephews, it's remarkable. My sister and her husband both have PhDs. I don't know about the qualitative subjects you interviewed, but my head was spinning as you described it because it's nothing like what my family's experience and my community that has been so supportive of it. And I say that because every parent who I've encountered at all but maybe one high school have been saying this was fantastic. The one high school where I've heard just sprinklings of people saying, I don't really think, the whole messaging in that community before we even put it in place was they didn't believe this was going to make a difference. So mindset wise, I think it is essential that if you don't have the open mind that you think this is going to produce something, you may not be looking for those changes. But this rich data is incredible. It really is. It moves beyond the anecdotal, and it goes to look at this as powerful. I was in a community meeting, and one parent said that a Fairfax County police officer at a driver's license swearing-in ceremony alleged that our car accident rates went up for teen drivers after we put this in place. And I said to the parent, I don't know why that officer would say that. That is nothing that we have heard from our police chief, nothing we've heard from our board of supervisors, but I will look into it. So this data particular that you pointed out today couldn't be more welcomed for me, because that's what I thought. I mean, that's substantial that ours dropped while they went up in the Commonwealth in terms of the number of accidents. And yes, I understand causality. I think the correlation certainly looks very strong there. I would also say as a parent that I've certainly seen that, as Dr. Owens, you were saying, it wasn't just about the volume or the hours of actual sleep. This circadian rhythm, this chronotype of whether you're an evening bird versus a morning bird is very real. And so even though in my own family, it wasn't always just about the volume of hours they got, it was the wake time. And they were zombies in the morning, and you can see it in the student parking lot. So this is, the kids are so much more alert. I would say my big request, Dr. Brabrand, is I'd like to see that we have a one-page key findings that school board members that we can send out to our communities. You can do it too, but I really want you can take bullet points from some of this stuff. Car accident rates dropped here, went up in Virginia. That the hours of reported sleep we saw when we did it at the high school level, that there was an increase, and yes, by 30 or 35 minutes. Finally, I will say, I said it when Dr. Garza put this through. You guys, we have got to find the solution for middle school. It is just, we see this, we know this, but these kids in middle school, we are still creating a more harmful learning environment when they're having to go so early in the morning against their own, time clocks. And so I really do hope, that we, I'd love Dr. Brabrand for me to be able to give you the next anointing of, he helped us solve the middle school start time problem, So I think it's something, in the grand scheme, and Mr. Plattenberg, you might be able to help us with this too. In a $2.8 billion operation, it is not that much money to find the solution for middle schools. And we need to stop saying we can't afford it. We can afford it. We've seen the benefits, and I just want to thank the researchers so much. You were also key partners in helping to articulate this in a way that for so long the community wasn't really sure how to receive it. And each of you were just brilliant in the way you connected in our community meetings and helped make this digestible for families to understand the importance of it. I'm so psyched about Boston.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Vaticana?
So thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation, coming from probably the nation's most chronically sleep-deprived school. And yeah, this is very interesting for me to hear about. So I had a few different questions, kind of. So you mentioned the light-emitting electronic devices. So there's been like a bunch of new systems introduced, like night mode and things like that. Do you know if that has been helping, or whether it can help to a significant extent?
I think in theory, if you block blue light, which is the most powerful spectrum in terms of suppressing release of melatonin, that would help. But I think there's other features of engaging with electronics before bed.
Yeah,
like it
social
stimulates
media,
you,
yeah.
right? It's not meant to put you to sleep. It's meant to wake you up. So I think, I tell my patients to use FLux or, one of these blue light blocking devices or apps. But how much good it actually does, I think we don't really know.
Yeah, the science, I don't think the science is quite there yet, but the multiple factors that do contribute to healthy school start, to healthy sleep duration, and timing, that's where education of the community is absolutely essential. That if you don't give parents and teachers and school nurses and principals the knowledge to implement, help parents and children implement healthy sleep, it's very, very tough to get there, light or no light.
Okay. And sorry.
I was just going to add, as the non-sleep researcher sitting here, you also have to consider the role of why students are using the devices at night anyway. In some additional analyses we've been doing, we've been looking at the connection between using the device at night, sleep, and bullying behavior. And we are actually seeing a connection between kids who use the phones at night engage in cyberbullying behavior, whether as a target or the one doing the bullying behavior, and their sleep duration. So there is the light that's being emitted, but also the behavior of actually using the device.
So beyond the actual use of the device itself. Okay. So then my next question is, so napping was categorized with sleepiness in terms of that not being exactly a good consequence of this. But to what extent do you think napping can be helpful for high school students who might be more of like the evening chronotypes to get some more rest in before?
Well, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I have many patients, adolescent patients, who come in who are, have all kinds of physical and emotional repercussions of not getting enough sleep, and we can't change their start time right now. And so I do recommend in those students that they take a short nap in the late afternoon, what we used to call a power nap, to just kind of recharge your batteries and enable them to get their homework done in a more efficient way. Because one of the things that happens when you're sleep deprived is you get the right answer, but it takes you a lot longer to get there. And what maybe takes you 5 hours in terms of getting your homework done, maybe that's really only 3 hours worth of homework, interspersed with social networking and all the other stuff. But it's a stopgap measure. It's not, it's not a long-term answer, but it does help in these situations where these kids are really in crisis.
Okay. And then my last question is, a lot of our schools, like my school included, we used to have this thing called JLC, which is basically like we start 40 minutes later on one of the school days, and some other schools include that to the effect of like Raider time. Do you think it helps on only certain days of the week to have school start maybe a half an hour later, even if we can't get a completely, like, a later school start time across the week?
I think any of us here would pay dear money for a little bit of extra sleep every single morning. So that translates to the kids, yes, a little bit more sleep in the morning, and some later mornings would help. So I think the simple answer is yes, that anything that you can give them, that will absolutely have a benefit.
I think, because you mentioned earlier that having that different sleep cycle, I guess, on the weekends affects students' ability to cope on Monday. So do you think that would be
So
a problem?
that big, a 30-minute shift or even an hour shift, I mean, some shift on weekends is normal. And some of that's catch-up sleep, and some of that's just getting sleep when you biologically need it. But a half-hour shift should not have a negative impact on kids across the course of the week.
Okay, thank you.
Although I will say there was one study and this was in an elementary school students, that looked at the issue of sleep variability, so night-to-night differences in terms of their sleep schedule, and did find that was related to disruptive behavior in the classroom. It was not related to academic issues. So it's a little bit of a 50-50 kind of thing. I think we simply don't know as much as we'd like to about that.
Do you know if there was any other research kind of done about the same disruptive behaviors for high schoolers and middle schoolers?
In terms of
The sleep variability.
not per se that I know of.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Palchik, could I take Ms. Karen Keys-Gamara first? She's going to have to leave in about 5 minutes for an evening event. So, Ms. Keys-Gamara, go ahead.
I won't be long. I just wanted to echo some of Ms. McLaughlin's comment with respect to, I actually attended my son's class when he got his license, and one of them was, at the time we were implementing the sleep, and he said that he expressed dismay because that meant that the children would be being released when traffic would be heavier, and so his prediction was that it would negatively impact traffic accidents. And so I'll be looking for him when I go back to court to help him understand the reality. So I was happy to see about a 5.5% reduction. Even though we can't prove the correlation,
Right.
it's still, like
Well,
winning the Army-Navy game. I'm just saying.
And there have been 2 studies that were actually done in Virginia, which compared adjacent counties that were very similar sociodemographically, one that had an earlier start time and one that had a later start time. And they found that not only did the earlier starting district have more accidents, but the peak was in the morning in particular. So it may not be so much the afternoon, although that, maybe has a lower peak, but it's that hour that in that school district started earlier that you see most of, and it makes perfect sense because, again, it's not just they haven't gotten enough sleep, but their brains
When they get
are
sleep, right.
at their lowest alertness point.
Right. And so I just also want to say, and I'm not going to suggest that we have a couple of days that we start later so we can develop new bus schedules. But I am looking forward to working on middle school. I am pounded by, there was a young lady here earlier actually who was in middle school simply to ask the question, when are you going to take care of that? She's in middle school and she's exhausted. So I know that was the case for my boys. We played this little game with the covers in the morning. It was really fun. So in any case, I look forward to working on the middle school problem.
Thank you, Ms. Palchik. And then I have Ms. Corbett-Sanders and Mrs. Strauss.
Thank you so much. And we'll echo a lot of the gratitude toward this work and those who came before. A couple of things. Number one, in order to continue the studying, is there something you need on our end in order to be able to do that?
I will say, so personally, our grant from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is up in January, which means as a contract research shop, it's a little bit different for my fellow colleagues here. We bill by the hour, so once our grant is up, we unfortunately cannot continue work. If, for instance, you would love additional analyses on discipline, I would love to do that. I'm personally passionate about discipline. We would need to find an additional funding source. I will say we are looking for that. But if there are specific things we can do for the board, we're certainly open to doing that.
Okay, but at this time, it's not slated to continue. And I don't know about your shops.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would like to look at another year's worth of data in terms of the driving, which isn't terribly difficult to do. We also have the youth risk behavior survey. And, given it, there's only one question about sleep, but it still gives us the opportunity to take data that's already being generated, and Fairfax County has been very generous in sharing that data and allowing us to examine it further. So, we could look at another year's worth of data on sleep duration, for example, as well as a whole host of other risk behaviors. So I think there are some options there in terms of continuing the work.
Yeah, I think there's some wonderful opportunities. I just echo Dr. Tampkin's comment that if there's something specific that people want to look at, let us know, and we can work with your research office also in developing those ideas. We do have other data, and there's a lot of data that we will continue to work on. Some of the data that's very exciting is what we call actigraphy, which is objective measures. It's like a Fitbit, but it's the scientific version. And that data will actually be published, hopefully in the not too distant future, which will provide, and there's very little of that across the country, looking at the impact, the objective results of school start time change.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And then following up on that and what Ms. McLaughlin was saying, whether it needs to come to PEC or not, I'm actually imagining one of those little videos we do about snow closings, data, and education. So I guess on that point, I know I have students who stay up till 2 a.m. because they're on their phones because it's their alarm clock. So if you have recommendations or data, on what education has been effective, if you have that in other systems so that we can incorporate that into our communication, I think that would be very helpful.
There are websites. I can refer you to the Sleep in Fairfax website. Our original website for this project, the Blueprint for Change website, is still up. So we can certainly give you that maybe in our final report, in addition to the tear sheet that was requested that summarizes the findings. We can also provide you with basic sleep education information, but implementing that in a very thoughtful and planful way in health classes, because that tends to be a deficit area. Fairfax could lead the nation in really developing some high school curricula on sleep.
Helpful. And if that has, just if you were limited, what are the most important things that have been shown to make a difference would be helpful in the education piece.
To optimize sleep, regular sleep-wake times on weekends and weekends, weekdays and weekends, regulating nap time, as Dr. Owens was recommending, eliminating use of caffeine, particularly after certain times during the day or altogether. Healthy and safe driving, right. Use of electronics and the type of electronics that are being used.
And we can follow up.
Exercise, right. Good diet,
right.
Also go along with healthy sleep. Those are the three pillars of health.
Okay, excellent. And then finally, obviously, I think it's become more important. Anything we can do to have a plan to attack middle school. Start times, I know times are tough, but the more and more, I think, data, and we can communicate the community, it is a much more even compelling argument for doing that. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who's been involved with this.
Mrs. Corbett-Sanders?
All right, I'm going to try to make it quick since it's 6 o'clock and I know people have things to do. Thank you very much for this, for your results. They're very interesting. I'm particularly interested in the safe driving aspects because I was with the head of the park police for the George Washington Parkway, who has publicly stated that the increase in accidents on the parkway in the morning were caused by students who were on the roads at the same time as people going to work. So the sooner you can get this data out in a very public manner, I think that would be very helpful. And it's also going to be important to track this in more than just 1 year because it could be considered a statistical anomaly for 1 year alone. I do think that we need to work on the middle school time because we traded off middle school for high school, as everybody knows. I would encourage that, and I'm glad to hear that Dr. Brabrand is going to share the discipline data if it's asked for again, because I think that would be a very important piece of it. And finally, I would, pardon me? Okay. Can I finish? Okay. And finally, my last comment has to do with after-school resources because this just came up recently with one of my high schools where high school teachers have said, I can't stay after school to support our students anymore because I have other demands now that we're going later. So as we look at this, we need to ensure that we provide the after-school supports for our students before they go off to do their athletics or other programs. Thank you.
Did you have a comment? Or no? Okay. Mrs. Strauss.
Thank you very much. This is all really very exciting. And I'm going to just really more make comments because I agree with everything you've said. It's wonderful. And we need to do more of it. There is a little bit of the Malcolm Gladwell in in this great science that you're doing, and even down to the cellular level, which I think that, because I've been reading some of that, that is just amazing on scientific evidence that shows that sleep rejuvenates every cell in the body and that you got to do it. People who are my age, old, it was always a badge of courage as to how little sleep you could get by with. We're aging out. We have the current parents, particularly parents in the elementary, middle school. Work-life balance is very important. The millennials, very important work-life balance, eating better, sleeping better, exercising more. So they're hearing your message. And as I say, we're ripe for understanding all of this. On the other hand, I think the challenge that we're also, kids are more risk averse. We have fewer kids driving. When you look at the data on accidents, you need to look at the N size as well, because we actually have fewer children driving at 16, 17, 18, and 19.
Yeah, we did look at that as the denominator.
Yeah, okay. The piece on the flip side is when you look at sort of the international economic market and jobs. I think of the one Japanese woman who died over exhaustion. And I know what goes on in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and some move to Boulder where my family is gone and they just break their bones on the ski slopes. But this, again, it is the belief in the science so that it's not just something touchy-feely and something that just makes us feel better, but that it is scientifically important for bodies to move forward. But I am concerned about the hyper-tech competition in the world, because I think that's a force that tends to push us against. And Niharika, in our most sleep-deprived high school, is Thomas Jefferson. And we can see that from our own youth risk survey, and the kids, taking 12, 13, 14 SAT exams just to get the credit for it, and AP exams. And but again, huge competition and tremendous sleep deprivation among some of our very highest achieving kids. I worry about that for our own children, and I worry about sort of the whole workplace of where we're going with that super achieving high-tech whatever. So keep going. And I have found among the parents here, I have not heard of anybody yet who has not really enjoyed the later start times for high school. And yes, we're being pushed for middle school. It's money, and we've got lots of issues. But our parent community and our kids are very happy with what we've done. But I still see another mountain for you all to climb.
Always.
The one thing that I will mention, just to your point of, we need to think about the whole child. We need to think not only about improving adolescent sleep quality and sleep duration, but also all the other aspects of the child. And Fairfax does a very good job of this, I will say. But thinking about how do we bring together the health, the social emotional benefits of our children, all of these pieces, and thinking about the whole child. That's one of the things that I am very passionate about.
Yeah, and our parents who are vocal believe that. I mean, they really do believe that. But as a whole society, and now as a global society, there's much more work to be done, and to get people to believe in the true science of it, not just the feel good, but the real science of it. So you need to keep publishing.
And I would say, though, what a powerful message it is to students and families for a school district to take the leap, to spend the money, to put their faith in the science, if you will, to make this kind of a change. I think that implicit message is incredibly powerful, that we take this seriously enough to really, surmount all these obstacles and challenges along the way. And that in itself, I hope eventually will, start to metastasize into something that really becomes a powerful societal message.
I should share with you, you realize the most from inside, and I've been on the board the longest of everybody else. We've been through many iterations of trying to finally change high school start times. The piece that broke us through was the other consultant that you hired that helped us with the athletic schedule and the bus schedule. That's what finally enabled us to break through the barriers and to have enough faith from the community that we could do this and we were not disadvantaging students who were active athletes or the community in the park system and recreation, everybody else. But that gentleman, and he's not here today, he was critical to the process. You were smart enough to hire him, and he was the one that went in behind the scenes and actually convinced people that it was possible, and Jeff Plattenberg, because between the two of them, we got past the naysayers, and that had been our problem before.
Yeah, Daryl Drobnich and Jeff and really his amazing team. I mean, his crew came forward in just a spectacular way to really map out the different options and was really
Right.
really
so it
above and
wasn't,
beyond.
because a lot of it wasn't that people didn't believe that sleeping later was better for kids. It was, could we do this without disadvantaging another piece of student activity that was very important to the community? So thank you.
And I think that's where the notion that this has become the new normal really is the key message. That, clearly above the board, folks did not perceive a negative impact from this. This goes, Dr. Owens has done this research in some other sites as well. This is very consistent with the findings. But to say in Fairfax, our community is saying this is normal to us now is a huge, huge finding.
Thank you. I will take a turn now, and you know I could talk about this all night, but I won't. It's such impressive research. Thank you all for putting this all together and giving us quite significant results. It's striking the difference between the actual and the impressions. Some of the impressions that some people at least have about the impact versus what the reality is. And I think, Dr. Owens, you certainly said it very well about how important 30 minutes a night is, every school night, how important that is to sleep and to health. So for those who thought this would not make a difference, clearly it has made a difference in the lives of our high school students. And just I wanted to pinpoint one piece of it, that even though the entire time wasn't used up, one of the things that you showed, correct me if I'm wrong, that more of our students were getting breakfast now. More of our high school students were getting breakfast. So it impacts health in a number of ways. The mood piece is huge. The fact that mood has improved among our students. And of course, you all had a unique opportunity with us to do side-by-side comparisons, so I'm glad that you were able to harness that opportunity in a maximum way. The car crashes, this is data we have to get to the court. I think, Ms. McLaughlin, you said it was an officer. I'd heard that a judge said the same thing. Had you heard that, Phyllis?
I've gone recently.
Yeah. Oh, it did not happen. Okay. Maybe it's not every judge. I had heard that a judge said it too. So I think in some way, shape, or form, we need to get to them this data that shows the 5% decrease, and whether or not we can attribute it entirely to later start times. If they're giving inaccurate data that car crashes increased after later start times, we can't let them continue to do that. So I hope we can package that, just that one item, and get that to wherever that is in the courts. And besides that, I will reiterate what some of my colleagues have said as well about the middle school times. At the time, I think we all regretted that was the price we had to pay for the later start times. I mean, now of course, we have to remember not all middle school students had an earlier time. We had some that were going at 7:20 in the morning because they were in secondary school. We had a couple of middle schools that were already there, but we did have most of our middle school students did go earlier. And Mr. Plattenberg, I don't know if you had any comment on any of this, or if you wanted to address the issue of if. Well, I just wanted to invite you to join us if you had comments. Mr. Plattenberg did such a stellar job on this issue, and so for one thing, I just want to be sure you get the credit due for all the amazing work you did to bring us to the point where we could have later high school start times. So, thank you for that. And just if you had comments either on the research that we've seen, or if you wanted to talk about any suggestions that are in the works on middle school, I think we would welcome that.
Well, thank you. The only thing I really can say, Ms. Evans, is that it was truly a team effort. And you have those moments in life where you were given a charge, a vision that was set by this body, and it wasn't really giving the details as to how to do it. And then you put together the talents of the group and the staff that we have here and the community citizens and the advocates, just the ground-swelling momentum. It wasn't without the growing pains that I guess leadership or any of those innovative practices don't entail. And we had a lot of growth opportunities and a lot of connectedness challenges that because we were all so passionate about what the charge was. But I want to thank you for that. We have taken a look at what it would take for the next phase, because we do understand the desire of the board. The non-negotiables are things that we would have to look at that are really pretty challenging, and we've looked at that, and our staff has come back with some things that we think just, I don't know if the community would withstand it without evidentiary material, without the springboard of this information and the data. I just can't thank this team enough, and it keeps growing, of different researchers and so forth and board members. It really is something that shows the benefit for students, and that's what we're all here for. So I just want to thank you for the recognition. It's not deserved of me, but my team, and I'm so proud of them, because it's everybody on the leadership team and everybody involved with Fairfax County Public Schools that had a part to play in this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, and certainly to the research team. I think now we're going to go to next steps if we've recorded any. I think we actually had Ms. McLaughlin had I
had the discipline stats.
Well, we had the discipline data, which I believe Dr. Braybrand has. Oh, and then, right, with Ms. McLaughlin, provide discipline data. Follow up on. Yeah, let's say, yeah, because I guess there were some sensitivities that Dr. Braybrand was going to have to look into, follow up on discipline. That's fine. Superintendent to create, distribute one pager with key findings. Is that correct, Ms. McLaughlin? Is that what you had in mind?
But I want another one added in there that's not up.
Okay.
I'm serious. I would like for the board to have the superintendent provide an update on where we are on middle school start times, cost, and because we did that when we put it in place. For anybody who remembers the vote, we said, we did. And Karen Garza told us she thought she'd get it done within 2 years.
That's not a follow-up, though, to this work session. That's budget.
No, it's not, Ms. Schultz. I'm sorry. This sleep study is further evidence that moving to a later start time is helpful to students. And so we should get a follow-up.
Does this capture to provide an update on middle school start times and potential solutions?
Yeah, solutions and costs associated.
Okay. So let's go one at a time. So with the one pager, can I see an indication of how many people are?
One thing I thought about is, do we have to wait until do we need to wait until is there anything else coming between now and February when you're due your final?
That's true. I mean, your final is going to be in February, correct?
Yes, we will be submitting a final report. I will mention that several of the papers that you have seen today are in the publication process, but we can certainly work with you to make sure that we can get you what you need.
Well, should we, would it make more sense to wait until your final report in February and then do the one pager after that? Yes. What?
The report
to us, yeah.
They're getting their stuff published with other research outlets.
So we are required to provide a final report to the Central Research Office.
FCPS.
But Child Trends is committed to providing information that's useful, so we are happy to help digest that information into a one-pager for you.
Yeah, I don't think we need to wait until February. The board just got briefed on this, and I think the sooner we start to let the community know that in a recent work session, the board received really great results out of the sleep study.
Should we, well then, just in light of your offer, should we say superintendent to work with researchers to create? Does that make sense? Okay, Ms. Melberg, superintendent to work with researchers to create, and then you can give the support that he needs. That's great. So let's just see an indication of how many folks can support number one. Okay. Superintendent to provide update on middle school start times and potential, should it be flipped? Potential solutions and costs?
It doesn't.
Doesn't matter? Okay. Okay, let's see how many people can support doing that. Okay, that's a winner. Follow up on discipline data. Support for that?
That's a superintendent to follow up.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, superintendent, okay. And with that, I again just want to thank all of you for your excellent work and for joining us today. And we have a small audience, but let's give them a round of applause. And with that, this work session is concluded. Thank you.